1 year ago this week, 67 people were killed in the mid-air collision in Washington, D.C., involving an American Airlines flight from Wichita and an Army helicopter. This week, investigators will vote on the probable cause of the crash and also propose new safety recommendations designed to prevent a similar tragedy.
Investigators Dylan Domang and Annette Lawless will be in D.C. this week for our coverage. Dylan joins us with what we can learn from the NTSB this week.
This is alert 3. Crash. This is alert 3.
The chilling emergency call first made on January 29th as the tragedy unfolded.
Approaching runway 33, helicopter crash.
An Army helicopter flying too high and without ADS-B location technology turned on had crossed into the direct path of Flight 5342.
Everyone who flies in American skies expects that we fly safely.
But that did not happen on January 29th. In the months after, investigators have been piecing evidence together, finding not just one factor that caused the collision, but a series of errors, some of which have been warned about before the crash even occurred.
Again, October 2021 through December 2024, there were 15,214 occurrences or close proximity events between commercial airplanes and helicopters.
And it's because of those close calls that the NTSB made urgent safety recommendations, including eliminating helicopter Route 4 from Haynes Point to Wilson Bridge, while the runways are being used for takeoffs and landings. It was on that route over the river where the two aircraft collided.
It shouldn't take a tragedy to require immediate action.
I don't think the recommendations that they've made so far are the final story.
John Golia, a former NTSB board member, expects the safety agency to expand on their previous recommendations. He also wants to see an effort to reduce the traffic in the D.C. airspace.
What pains me the most is the human failures that went unaddressed by the people who had the responsibility for correcting those human errors.
In December, the U.S. government took some responsibility for the crash. In court documents filed in response to lawsuits from the families of those killed, the government said the helicopter pilots failed to maintain vigilance to see and avoid other aircraft, and that failure was a cause of the collision. The documents make a similar claim that the pilots of the plane also failed to avoid the helicopter. Meanwhile, congressional leaders using the tragedy to pass legislation known as the Rotor Act, requiring all aircraft to turn on ADS-B, real-time location technology, when flying.
The Rotor Act closes the loopholes that have been described by my colleagues. It strengthens ADS-B requirements for commercial and military aircraft, among many other things.
A former NTSB board member says after the agency determines the probable cause and issues more recommendations, the case does not close there. For months and potentially years to come, board members will be speaking out, making sure lawmakers and federal agencies adopt those recommendations so a similar tragedy does not occur again. Our crew will be in D.C. all week providing you coverage on air and